On a humid summer morning in Delaware, in the year 2001, a young woman named Lindsay Bonestall left her apartment to run errands in the quiet town of Wilmington. She was 23 years old, a recent college graduate with auburn hair and a quick smile, working at a local insurance office while saving money for graduate school. She told her roommate she would be back by noon. She never returned. Her car was found 3 days later in a shopping center parking lot, keys still in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat, the driver's side door slightly ajar. There was no sign of struggle, no witnesses, no answers. For nearly 2 decades, Lindsay Bonestall's disappearance remained one of Delaware's most haunting mysteries, a case that seemed destined to grow cold beneath the weight of unanswered questions and dead ends. But sometimes, the truth doesn't stay buried. Sometimes, it claws its way back into the light through the smallest crack, through a single conversation, through one person's conscience finally breaking after years of silence. What really happened to Lindsay Bonestall on that July morning, and who had been hiding the truth all along? Wilmington, Delaware, in the summer of 2001, was a city caught between identities. The downtown area held the gleaming towers of credit card companies and banking institutions, while just blocks away, neighborhoods of row houses stretched out in neat lines, their stoops crowded with families trying to escape the heat. The Brandywine River cut through the landscape, its banks lined with walking trails where joggers passed beneath old oak trees in the early morning hours. This was a place where everyone seemed to know someone who knew someone else, where news traveled fast through networks of family connection and workplace conversations. Lindsay had grown up in Dover, about an hour south, but had moved to Wilmington after graduating from the University of Delaware the previous May. Her parents, Robert and Susan Bonestall, had been hesitant about the move. Robert worked as a mechanic at a Ford dealership, his hands perpetually stained with engine grease, while Susan managed the front desk at a dental office. They had raised Lindsay and her younger brother, Marcus, in a modest split-level house with a backyard that backed up to a retention pond. Lindsay had always been the ambitious one, the first in her family to finish college, determined to make something of herself beyond the borders of their small town. Her apartment was a second-floor unit in a complex off Concord Pike, one of those sprawling developments built in the 70s with exterior staircases and parking spots assigned by number. She shared the space with Jenna McKenzie, a childhood friend who worked as a substitute teacher. The apartment smelled of vanilla candles and coffee, its walls decorated with photographs from their college years and motivational posters bought at discount stores. Their daily routine was predictable, comfortable. Jenna taught summer school most mornings. Lindsay left for work at the insurance office by 8:30, her route taking her down Route 202, past the strip malls and gas stations that marked the commercial arteries of Newcastle County. July 14, 2001, was a Saturday. The temperature had climbed into the low 90s by 10 in the morning, the kind of sticky heat that made the asphalt shimmer and left the air feeling thick enough to touch. Jenna had spent the night at her boyfriend's apartment and came home around 9 to find Lindsay sitting at their small kitchen table, still in her pajamas, drinking iced tea and reading the newspaper. The television was on in the background, tuned to a morning talk show neither of them was really watching. "I'm going to run to the bank and then stop by Target," Lindsay said, circling an advertisement in the newspaper with a blue pen. "They have those storage bins on sale. We need to organize the closet." Jenna nodded, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. "Want me to come with you?" "Nah, I'll be quick, be back by noon. We can grab lunch somewhere." Those were the last words Jenna McKenzie heard Lindsay Bonestall speak in person. Lindsay went to her bedroom and changed into jean shorts and a white tank top. She pulled her hair into a ponytail and slipped on her sneakers, the ones with the frayed laces she kept meaning to replace. She grabbed her purse, a brown leather bag she had received as a graduation gift, and her car keys. The apartment door closed behind her at approximately 10:45 in the morning. Jenna heard her footsteps on the exterior stairs, heard the familiar sound of Lindsay's Honda Civic starting up in the parking lot below. The bank was a 5-minute drive. The Target was another 7 minutes beyond that, located in a shopping center that also housed a grocery store, a pet supply shop, and a chain restaurant. Security footage from the bank's ATM showed Lindsay withdrawing $60 at 11:03 in the morning. She was alone. She appeared calm, unhurried. She got back into her car and drove away, heading north toward the shopping center. And then nothing. Noon came and went. Jenna made herself a sandwich and turned on a movie. 1 o'clock arrived. She sent a text message to Lindsay's phone asking if she wanted Chinese food for lunch. No response. By 2 o'clock, Jenna felt the first flutter of concern, but she pushed it away. Lindsay had probably run into an old friend, or the store was more crowded than expected, or she had decided to stop somewhere else. By 4 o'clock, Jenna tried calling. The phone rang and rang, eventually going to voicemail. She left a message. "Hey, where are you? Just checking in, call me back." By 6 o'clock, real worry had set in. Jenna called Lindsay's parents. Susan answered on the third ring, her voice bright and unsuspecting. "Hi, sweetie, what's going on? Have you talked to Lindsay today?" "No, not since Thursday. Why? Is everything okay?" Jenna explained the situation, trying to keep her voice steady, trying not to sound like she was overreacting. Susan's tone changed immediately. "We'll start calling around. You stay there in case she comes back." Robert and Susan began working through their mental list of possibilities. They called Lindsay's brother. They called her ex-boyfriend from college, a relationship that had ended months earlier but remained cordial. They called the insurance office where she worked, though they knew it was closed on weekends. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. By 9 o'clock that evening, Jenna called the Wilmington Police Department to file a report. The officer who took her call was professional but measured in his response. Missing persons cases involving adults were complicated. People had the right to go where they pleased. Still, he took down the information. Lindsay Marie Bonestall, 23 years old, last seen leaving her apartment around 10:45 that morning, driving a 1998 silver Honda Civic, wearing jean shorts and a white tank top. He assured Jenna that patrol officers would keep an eye out for the vehicle. Sunday morning arrived with no news. Robert and Susan drove up from Dover, their faces drawn with sleeplessness. They went to the police station in person. They provided recent photographs of Lindsay. They explained that this was completely out of character, that Lindsay was responsible and reliable, that she would never just disappear without telling anyone. The desk sergeant listened with sympathy and assured them the department was taking the matter seriously. But there was an unspoken reality everyone understood. The first 24 hours had passed, and Lindsay Bonestall had simply vanished. On Monday morning, July 16th, 2 police officers went to the Target shopping center to review security footage and ask questions. The parking lot was massive, designed to accommodate weekend crowds, with cameras positioned at the entrances but not covering every section of the lot itself. Hours of footage showed hundreds of vehicles coming and going. None of the store employees remembered seeing anyone matching Lindsay's description, but it had been a busy Saturday, and one young woman in summer clothes would not necessarily stand out in the crowd of weekend shoppers. Then on Tuesday afternoon, July 17th, a security guard making his rounds noticed a silver Honda Civic parked in a far corner of the lot, away from the main store entrances. The vehicle had been sitting in the same spot since at least Sunday evening, when the guard had first taken note of it. He approached the car and peered inside. A brown purse sat on the passenger seat. The keys dangled from the ignition. The driver's side door was not fully closed, hanging open perhaps an inch, as if someone had pushed it shut but the latch had not quite caught. The security guard immediately called the police. Within an hour, officers had secured the scene. They ran the license plate and confirmed what they already suspected. This was Lindsay Bonistall's vehicle. The purse contained her wallet, her identification, her credit cards, the $60 she had withdrawn from the ATM. Her cell phone was in the cup holder, its battery dead. There was no sign of blood, no indication of violence. The car's interior was neat, ordinary. A few receipts in the center console, an empty water bottle, a CD case on the back seat. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the absence of the person who belonged there. Robert and Susan Bonistall arrived at the shopping center within minutes of receiving the call. Susan's legs nearly gave out when she saw the car, and Robert had to hold her upright. Police officers gently but firmly kept them back from the vehicle while investigators photographed every angle, dusted for fingerprints, searched for any trace of evidence that might explain what had happened. The investigation expanded rapidly. Volunteers from the community began organizing search parties, combing through the wooded areas surrounding the shopping center, walking the trails along the Brandywine River, checking abandoned buildings and vacant lots. Lindsay's photograph appeared on the evening news. Tips began trickling into the police department. Someone thought they saw her at a rest stop on I-95. Someone else remembered a woman matching her description at a convenience store in Pennsylvania. None of the leads panned out. Detectives interviewed everyone who knew Lindsay. Her coworkers described her as professional and well-liked. Her friends said she seemed happy, excited about the future, showing no signs of depression or distress. Her ex-boyfriend had a solid alibi for the entire weekend. There were no concerning relationships, no known enemies, no financial troubles that might drive someone to run away. Lindsay Bonistall appeared to have simply stepped out of her car in a crowded parking lot in broad daylight and disappeared into thin air. Part 2. The investigation. The search operation grew in the days following the discovery of Lindsay's abandoned vehicle. Delaware State Police joined Wilmington officers, bringing cadaver dogs and helicopter surveillance. The Newcastle County Sheriff's Office contributed additional personnel. Volunteers arrived in waves, ordinary citizens who had seen the news coverage and felt compelled to help. They formed lines and walked slowly through fields and forests, their eyes scanning the ground for any sign, any clue. They distributed flyers at gas stations and grocery stores throughout a 50-mile radius. Lindsay's face became ubiquitous, starring out from telephone poles and community bulletin boards, her smile frozen in time, her eyes asking the question no one could answer. The media attention intensified. Local news stations ran daily updates. The Philadelphia newspapers picked up the story. A reporter from a national cable network came to Wilmington to interview Lindsay's parents, and millions of viewers across the country watched as Susan Bonistall pleaded for information, her voice breaking as she begged anyone who knew anything to come forward. Detectives focused their efforts on reconstructing Lindsay's movements during those lost minutes between leaving the bank and abandoning her car. They interviewed everyone who had been working at the shopping center that Saturday. They collected security footage from every camera in the vicinity. They measured distances and calculated timelines. Lindsay had withdrawn money from the ATM at 11:03. The target was approximately 7 minutes away. That meant she should have arrived at the shopping center around 11:10, give or take a few minutes depending on traffic lights and her driving speed. But here was the first inconsistency. None of the security footage from the shopping center entrances showed Lindsay's Honda Civic arriving during that time frame. Investigators reviewed every vehicle that entered the parking lot between 11 o'clock and noon. They cataloged license plates and vehicle descriptions. Lindsay's silver Honda was not among them. This meant one of two possibilities. Either she had never made it to the shopping center at all, despite telling her roommate that was her destination, or she had arrived much later than expected, after taking a detour somewhere else first. But where and why? Detectives pulled her phone records. The device found in her car showed no outgoing calls or text messages after 10:30 that morning, before she had even left her apartment. There were no incoming calls that might have prompted a change of plans. Her email account revealed nothing unusual. Her bank records showed no suspicious transactions. Those who knew Lindsay insisted this was completely out of character. She was the most organized person I ever met, her supervisor at the insurance office told investigators. She kept lists for everything. She was never late, never forgot an appointment. If she said she was going to Target, that's where she was going. Jenna McKenzie provided a nearly identical assessment. Lindsay didn't do spontaneous. She planned everything. If she had decided to go somewhere else first, she would have texted me. She always did. Yet the security footage told a different story. The cameras did not lie. Lindsay's vehicle had not entered the shopping center parking lot during the expected window of time. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about another possibility, one that seemed almost too dark to speak aloud. What if Lindsay had never been driving the car at all? What if someone else had brought it to the parking lot, staging it to look like she had arrived on her own? But that theory raised more questions than it answered. The ATM footage clearly showed Lindsay alone, apparently safe and calm, just minutes before she vanished. If someone had taken her between the bank and the shopping center, how had they done so without witnesses on busy Saturday morning roads? And why had they returned her car to the Target parking lot instead of disposing of it somewhere more remote? Investigators conducted a detailed examination of the vehicle. They found Lindsay's fingerprints on the steering wheel, the door handle, the gear shift. They also found several other sets of prints, but these were eventually matched to Jenna, to Robert and Susan, to the mechanic who had performed an oil change the previous month. There were no unknown prints, no signs of struggle. The car's mechanical systems were functioning normally. There was no evidence it had been involved in a collision or forced off the road. The interior was searched with painstaking care. Every receipt, every scrap of paper, every item in the glove compartment was cataloged and analyzed. Investigators found a shopping list in Lindsay's handwriting, confirming what Jenna had told them. Storage bins, laundry detergent, paper towels. Ordinary errands for an ordinary Saturday. They examined the exterior for any marks or damage that might provide clues. They found a small dent in the rear bumper, but Robert confirmed this had been there for months, the result of another driver backing into Lindsay's car in a parking lot. They checked the odometer reading and compared it to the mileage Lindsay had recorded during her last visit to the mechanic. The numbers were consistent with her normal driving patterns. There was no indication she had taken any long or unusual trips. As July turned into August, the investigation began to show signs of strain. The initial surge of volunteer searchers dwindled. The daily news coverage became weekly, then sporadic. Detectives continued following leads, but most of them led nowhere. A psychic called the police department claiming to have visions of Lindsay near water. Search teams walked the banks of every creek and pond in the county, finding nothing. Robert and Susan remained in Wilmington, staying at a hotel near their daughter's apartment, unable to return to their normal lives while Lindsay remained missing. Robert took a leave of absence from the dealership. Susan stopped going to work altogether. They spent their days at the police station, pressing detectives for updates, asking the same questions over and over. What are you doing to find our daughter? What leads are you following? Why haven't you found her yet? The lead detective on the case, a 20-year veteran named Michael Garrett, struggled to provide answers that would satisfy them. In his notes from that period, he wrote, "Every missing persons case reaches a point where the evidence runs dry and you're left with nothing but theories and hope. We've conducted over 200 interviews. We've searched hundreds of acres. We've followed every credible lead and quite a few incredible ones. And we still have no idea what happened to Lindsay Bonestall after she left that ATM." September arrived. Lindsay's 24th birthday passed without celebration. The insurance company where she had worked held a candlelight vigil in the parking lot. Dozens of people attended, holding flickering flames against the gathering darkness, singing hymns and sharing memories. Susan Bonestall spoke to the crowd, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "My daughter is out there somewhere," she said. "I know she is. We just have to find her. We just have to keep looking." But as autumn deepened and the leaves began to turn, even the most optimistic observers had to acknowledge a grim reality. The chances of finding Lindsay alive were diminishing with each passing day. The case began its slow, inevitable slide toward the cold case files, joining the ranks of unsolved disappearances that haunted law enforcement agencies across the country. By the time winter arrived, Detective Garrett had been reassigned to other cases. The investigation into Lindsay Bonestall's disappearance remained officially open, but active leads had been exhausted. The file sat in a cabinet at the police department, several inches thick, filled with witness statements and crime scene photographs and forensic reports that had yielded no answers. Robert and Susan finally returned to Dover, moving through their days like ghosts, their lives suspended in a perpetual state of waiting. Jenna moved out of the apartment she had shared with Lindsay, unable to bear the empty bedroom and the memories that haunted every corner. She packed Lindsay's belongings carefully and delivered them to Robert and Susan, who stored them in their garage, unable to look at them but unable to throw them away. The case went cold, not forgotten but dormant, waiting. Part 3, The Silence. 3 years passed, then 5, then 10. The calendar pages turned, indifferent to grief, indifferent to unanswered questions. Robert and Susan Bonestall's marriage began to fracture under the weight of their daughter's absence. They had always been partners, united in their approach to life's challenges, but tragedy has a way of isolating people even as it binds them together. Susan found herself unable to let go, unable to move forward. She kept Lindsay's bedroom exactly as it had been, the bed made, the posters still on the walls, the closet full of clothes that would never be worn again. She visited online forums dedicated to missing persons cases, connecting with other families trapped in the same terrible limbo. Robert threw himself into work, accepting overtime shifts at the dealership, staying late into the evening, finding refuge in the familiar rhythms of repairing engines and changing oil. He stopped talking about Lindsay with anyone except Susan, and even those conversations became brief and painful, filled with long silences and things left unsaid. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the ground shift beneath your feet as certainty transforms into suspicion, you understand the particular torture of not knowing. Susan sometimes woke in the middle of the night with a terrible thought lodged in her mind. What if Lindsay had chosen to disappear? What if their daughter had walked away from her life deliberately, seeking escape from something or someone they knew nothing about? The rational part of Susan's mind rejected this possibility immediately. But in those dark hours before dawn, when sleep remained elusive and fear spoke with the loudest voice, even the most irrational thoughts could take root. Marcus, Lindsay's younger brother, had been 19 when his sister vanished. He had processed the trauma in his own way, withdrawing from the family, moving across the country to Seattle, building a life thousands of miles away from the scene of his greatest loss. He called home on holidays but kept the conversations short. The pain was too present, too raw, even years later. In Wilmington, Jenna Mackenzie had married her boyfriend and started a family. She named her first daughter Lindsay Grace, a gesture of remembrance and love. But she struggled with guilt that therapists assured her was common among survivors. Guilt that she had not gone to Target with Lindsay that morning. Guilt that she had waited so long before calling the police. Guilt that she was living a full life while her best friend remained missing. The investigation file gathered dust. New detectives joined the department, young officers who had never heard of the Bonestall case. Occasionally, someone would stumble across Lindsay's photograph in an old newspaper or an online database of missing persons. They would read the details, feel a momentary pang of sadness, and then move on with their lives. The world kept spinning. Other crimes occurred, other cases demanded attention. But in 2015, 14 years after Lindsay's disappearance, something shifted. The Wilmington Police Department underwent a change in leadership, and the new chief made it a priority to review cold cases with fresh eyes. He assigned a young detective named Sarah Chen to start working through the backlog, looking for cases that might benefit from new technology or new investigative approaches. Chen pulled the Bonestall file in January 2016. She spent weeks reading through every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. She reviewed the security footage that had been preserved digitally. She studied the timeline, the inconsistencies, the questions that had never been adequately answered. One detail caught her attention: the keys in the ignition. This was a recurring element in the reports, mentioned by the security guard who first found the car, noted by every investigator who examined the vehicle. But no one had really grappled with what it meant. If someone had been planning to abandon a car and disappear, would they leave the keys in the ignition? It seemed unlikely. Keys suggested interrupted action, as if the driver had intended to return momentarily. But if the driver had been Lindsay, intending to walk into the store and come back to her car, why had she left her purse? Why had she never returned? Chen decided to re-interview witnesses, anyone who might remember something new or might be willing to share information they had previously withheld. She started with Jenna Mackenzie, now living in a suburban development with her husband and 2 children. They sat at Jenna's kitchen table on a cold February afternoon, drinking coffee while Jenna's youngest daughter played in the next room. "Tell me about that morning again," Chen said. "I know you've gone through this 100 times, but I need to hear it fresh." Jenna closed her eyes, reaching back through the years. Lindsay was reading the newspaper. She circled something in an ad. She said she was going to the bank and then Target. She seemed completely normal, happy even. She was talking about organizing our closet. Did she mention meeting anyone, running any other errands? No, just the bank and Target. Did she seem worried about anything, stressed? Jenna paused, really thinking about the question. No, I mean, we were both kind of stressed about money in those days. We were young, working entry-level jobs, trying to pay rent and student loans, but nothing unusual, nothing that would make her run away or put herself in danger. Chen made notes. What about relationships? Was there anyone she was seeing, even casually? She had gone on a few dates that summer with a guy from her gym, but nothing serious. She said he was nice but kind of boring. Do you remember his name? Jenna frowned. Tyler something. The police interviewed him back then. He had an alibi. Jen checked her files. Tyler Morrison. Interviewed July 2001. Confirmed to be at work in Philadelphia the entire day Lindsay disappeared. Cleared as a suspect. The reinvestigation continued through the spring. Jen tracked down former witnesses, many of whom had moved away or changed their lives in the intervening years. Most had little new to offer. Their memories had faded, details lost to time. Then, in June 2016, Jen received an unexpected phone call. The caller was a woman named Patricia Hendricks, age 52, a resident of Newark, Delaware. She explained that she had information about the Lindsay Bonestall case, but had been afraid to come forward for many years. Jen drove to Newark that same afternoon. Patricia lived in a small ranch house on a quiet street. They sat in her living room, and Patricia's hands shook as she spoke. I saw something that day, she began. July 14, 2001. I was at that shopping center where they found her car. I was loading groceries into my trunk and I saw a silver Honda Civic pull into a parking spot pretty far from the store. A woman got out of the driver's seat. But here's the thing. There was a man in the passenger seat. He got out too, and they stood there talking for a minute. Then the woman walked away, toward the store, and the man got into the driver's seat. He sat there for a while like he was waiting. I finished loading my groceries and left. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Jen felt her pulse quicken. Why didn't you report this in 2001? Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I didn't see the news coverage until weeks later. By then, I convinced myself I must be misremembering or it must have been a different car. And then, I was going through a difficult time in my life. I had problems of my own. I told myself it probably didn't matter, but it's haunted me for 15 years. I keep thinking, what if it does matter? What if I could have helped? Can you describe the man? It was a long time ago. I remember he was wearing a baseball cap, dark clothes, maybe jeans and a t-shirt, average height, average build, nothing that really stood out. Did you see his face? Not really. He had his back to me most of the time. What about the woman? Are you sure it was Lindsay Bonestall? Patricia hesitated. I saw her picture in the news later. It looked like her. Auburn hair in a ponytail, young. I'm not 100% certain, but I think it was her. Jen spent hours with Patricia, going over every detail, every piece of the memory. When she returned to the station, she added Patricia's statement to the file and began working through the implications. If Patricia's account was accurate, it meant Lindsay had arrived at the shopping center with a male companion. This had never been part of the investigation's working theory. Every assumption had been built on the idea that Lindsay was alone. Jen pulled the phone records again, looking for any calls that might have been made that morning before Lindsay left her apartment. She cross-referenced them with known contacts. Then she noticed something. At 9:30 that morning, Lindsay had received a call from a number that investigators in 2001 had identified as belonging to Ryan Callahan, a 28-year-old construction worker who lived in Wilmington. Ryan Callahan. Jen typed the name into the database and found his file from the original investigation. He had been interviewed briefly in August 2001. He told detectives that Lindsay was an acquaintance, someone he had met through mutual friends. He claimed he had called her that morning to see if she wanted to grab coffee sometime, but she had told him she was busy. He said they had never actually gone out. He had a partial alibi for July 14th. He had been working a construction job until noon, then had gone home alone for the rest of the day. His coworkers confirmed the morning timeline. Without any evidence connecting him to Lindsay's disappearance, investigators had moved on. But now, with Patricia's testimony, Chen had a reason to take another look. She began researching Ryan Callahan's life over the past 15 years. What she found made her stomach tight. Part 4: The Revelation. In 2008, 7 years after Lindsay Bonestall vanished, Ryan Callahan had been arrested for domestic violence against his then-girlfriend. The charges had eventually been dropped when the girlfriend refused to testify, but the arrest record remained. In 2012, he had been questioned in connection with a stalking complaint filed by a different woman, though no charges were filed. The pattern was troubling. Multiple women, multiple incidents of controlling or threatening behavior. Chen requested a current address and found that Ryan Callahan was still living in Wilmington, now working as a supervisor for a landscaping company. She decided to bring him in for questioning, but she wanted more leverage first. She needed to find out if there was any connection between Callahan and Lindsay beyond that phone call on the morning of her disappearance. She contacted Jenna McKenzie again. Did Lindsay ever mention anyone named Ryan Callahan? Jenna thought for a moment. That name sounds vaguely familiar. I think they might have known each other from the gym. Lindsay mentioned going to lunch with him once, maybe 2 months before she disappeared. She said he was kind of intense, that he kept trying to make plans and she wasn't really interested. She stopped returning his calls. This was information that had not been in the original file. Chen felt the pieces beginning to shift, the shape of something darker emerging from the shadows. She decided to approach Ryan Callahan directly. On September 8, 2016, 2 detectives knocked on his door and asked if he would be willing to come to the station to answer some follow-up questions about Lindsay Bonestall. Callahan agreed without hesitation, appearing calm and cooperative. At the station, Chen and her partner conducted the interview in a small room with recording equipment. They started with basic questions, establishing his relationship with Lindsay, going over the timeline he had provided 15 years earlier. "You told investigators in 2001 that you barely knew Lindsay," Chen said. "But we've learned you had lunch with her at least once. You called her multiple times. That seems like more than barely knowing someone." Callahan shifted in his seat. "I mean, I knew her a little, we were friendly, but we weren't close." "You called her the morning she disappeared. What did you talk about?" "I already told the police this back then. I asked if she wanted to get coffee. She said she was busy." "Did she say what she was busy doing?" "Running errands, I think." "Did you offer to go with her?" "No." "Did you see her at all that day?" "No." Chen leaned forward. "Here's the problem, Ryan. We have a witness who saw Lindsay at the Target shopping center that morning. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her, a man wearing a baseball cap and dark clothes. Sound familiar?" For the first time, Callahan's composure flickered. His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." The witness saw them get out of a silver Honda Civic. Lindsay walked toward the store. The man got back into the driver's seat and waited. "That man was you, wasn't it?" Callahan stared at the table. The silence stretched out, seconds becoming minutes. Chen and her partner waited, letting the pressure build. Finally, Callahan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need a lawyer." The interview ended. Callahan was released, but Chen knew she was close to something. Over the following weeks, she built her case methodically. She obtained warrants to search Callahan's property and vehicles. She re-interviewed his former girlfriends, asking about his behavior, his tendencies, his capacity for violence. One woman, speaking on condition of anonymity, told Chen, "Ryan couldn't handle rejection. If you tried to break things off with him, he would show up everywhere. Your work, your home, your friends' houses. He needed to control the narrative. He needed to be the one who decided when things ended. Then, in November 2016, came the breakthrough. Detectives searching Callahan's current residence found a storage unit he had been renting since 2003. Inside, among boxes of old belongings, they found a small leather journal. The journal belonged to Lindsay Bonestall. Her name was written inside the front cover in her distinctive handwriting. The last entry was dated July 13, 2001, the day before she disappeared. The entry read, "Ryan called again today. I told him I'm not interested in dating him. He got angry and said I was leading him on. I wasn't. I was just being friendly. I need to be more careful. Some people can't tell the difference between kindness and interest." Chen presented this evidence to the prosecutor's office. In December 2016, Ryan Callahan was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lindsay Bonestall. Without a body, they could not charge him with anything more serious, but they had enough to move forward with the kidnapping charge based on the journal, Patricia's testimony, and the pattern of behavior documented over the years. Callahan's arrest made national news. The case that had gone cold for 15 years was suddenly front-page news again. Reporters descended on Wilmington. Camera crews set up outside the courthouse. Robert and Susan Bonestall, now in their 60s, gave emotional interviews, their faces showing every year of grief they had endured. "We never stopped believing someone knew what happened to our daughter," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "We never stopped hopping for answers." The trial began in June 2017. Prosecutors built their case carefully, presenting the journal, Patricia's eyewitness account, the phone records, and testimony from women who described Callahan's controlling and obsessive behavior. They argued that Callahan had convinced Lindsay to meet him that morning under false pretenses, that he had driven her car to the shopping center, that something had gone terribly wrong, and that he had spent the past 16 years hiding the truth. Callahan's defense attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the journal proved nothing except that Lindsay had found his attention unwelcome, that Patricia's memory after 15 years could not be trusted, that there was no physical evidence linking his client to any crime. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day, filled with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and community members who had followed the case for years. Jenna McKenzie testified, describing her last conversation with Lindsay. Patricia Hendricks testified, recounting what she had seen in the parking lot that July morning so long ago. Expert witnesses discussed patterns of obsessive behavior and stalking. Callahan himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence. He admitted that he had been interested in Lindsay romantically, that he had perhaps pursued her more aggressively than he should have, but he insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. "I called her that morning to ask her out," he said. "She said no. That was the end of it. I never saw her that day." But under cross-examination, he struggled to explain how Lindsay's journal had ended up in his storage unit. He claimed he had no idea how it got there, suggesting that someone must have planted it, though he could not explain who or why.